Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
On the Chicago Magazine digital site, there is an article up by Tim Kinsella, and it is titled, "I Barely Made It Out of Italy." Tim Kinsella and his wife, Jennifer Polis, are musicians. They're in a band together, and they went to Italy to play a number of engagements. They were both in Milan, where Tim came down with an absolutely horrific illness. He didn't know if it was a cold or he didn't know if it was a flu. It got so bad that he said the pain of breathing became unbearable, and he went to the ER. Now, remember, this is the first few days of February. He said the emergency room did chest x-rays. They asked if he'd been to China. Then they sent him home, told him to stay in bed and take ibuprofen. Now, he said after a few days of rest, he actually felt a lot better. But by then, his wife, Jen, came down with the illness. This is what he writes. "I had never seen her like this. The severity of her body aches and fever terrified me. 2 full days and 2 nightmare nights of sweating and writhing, clenched in pain. We took her to the ER exactly 1 week after I'd been there, and everyone at the hospital was now wearing masks." Tim goes on to describe his wife's recovery and then to write about what they saw happen in Italy over the next days and weeks. Tim joins us now. Hey, Tim, you're back in the United States and you're safe. Just want to clear that up, right?
Yeah. We've been feeling good for at least a month now. We're totally fine. We've been home about a week and feeling good for a month. It sounds so horrible when you read it back to me.
Well, I've got to tell you, as I was reading what you wrote, I mean, I was getting goosebumps. I mean, it was like watching a horror movie, only reading your text. It was really amazing.
I think that's probably the credit of good editing. I think I probably turned in a sort of manic thing twice that long, and he cut it down to be more thrilling. I don't know. I'm still processing it, so.
Well, what I thought was interesting, first of all, was interesting the various symptoms that you and your wife had. And by the way, she's a really good sport for letting the magazine publish that picture of her in the hospital. I have to give her kudos for that. But I thought what was really interesting was after you guys both got through the worst of it, what you saw a change in your friends and everyone's behavior in the days and weeks after that. Tell us about that.
Well, Italy, I've traveled so much over the last half of my life, but I've never stayed in one place. Being a musician, you go everywhere for 12 hours and mostly you're just in a van. So this was really amazing to me to be able to spend an extended period somewhere. But, Italian culture, it's so different than here. Number one, I think it's more, everywhere you go, it's just all old men on the street. It just seems, especially where we were far south, it was like how does this civilization sustain itself if the whole population is just 75-year-old men? So, I think that's why the numbers, I'm obviously not a doctor or statistician or something, but I'm sure that's why the numbers look so terrifying, is it's just an old population, and also their sense of personal space is so different than Americans. They're close talkers, and they have their hands all over you the whole time. Yeah. And I think there's just, I'm not I don't mean this to sound like assigning blame or something. It's just a cultural difference. It's we now have Italy to look at as a worst case scenario to avoid, right? So we all take the social distancing seriously. They didn't have the advantage of seeing it coming in the way we do. So everyone we know was just like, oh yeah, I had the flu, it was awful, but then they keep hugging and touching and going about like normal. So, but then it was just, one day at a time.
Well, I thought it
One
was
little
interesting
detail
in
at a
the
time.
article, the way you describe sort of very slowly everybody in Italy waking up to the fact that this was something out of the ordinary. And you were, talking about how every day you ran fewer and fewer errands, and you started to
Yeah.
worry, was the repairman going to show up to fix your fridge? And how the pharmacist scolded you when you tried to
Yeah.
buy 3 packs of ibuprofen.
Yeah. I
What
mean,
was
the
that?
largest, well, I had no idea. The largest pack of ibuprofen, on a normal day, my whole life, I have like a, 500 pack of Tylenol on me. So the largest thing they sell is a 36 thing. And so I said, oh, I'll have 3. And then he's like, what, 3? Like, you crazy hoarding American. It's just a different standard. Yeah, it was, the grocery store was interesting because there we could sort of see, because we got to, the first couple weeks we were there, we were very excited to be learning Italian, and pretty quickly we were sick, but we were still traveling and playing shows while sick, and that was no fun. And then by the time we felt better, the sort of cultural anxiety was spreading. So eventually it was really like the women that worked at the grocery store that we had the most contact with. And it was sort of like watching them each day just get a little more, I don't know. I don't want to, maybe I'm projecting fear on them, a little more cautious.
Well, I think that
Taking
would
more.
certainly be understandable as they saw things spool out of control. Now, Italy is the country everybody looks to when they're trying to encourage people to social distance and stay at home. And they say, sort of, look what's happened in Italy. Do you want us to go there? Tim, hang on for just a second. We need to take a real quick break. And when we come back, after going through that experience of being a part of the country that really woke a lot of us up to this virus and what we were in for, I want to ask you if you have any advice for us as we begin our, what did Governor Pritzker call it? Our stay-at-home order. I'm talking with Tim Kinsella. He's written just an amazing story in the digital issue of Chicago Magazine. It's titled, I Barely Made It Out of Italy. And indeed, he barely did. We're going to continue this discussion right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
If you want to know what it's like to live through the worst of coronavirus, pick up a digital subscription to Chicago Magazine and look for an article written by Tim Kinsella. It's titled, I Barely Made It Out of Italy. Tim and his wife, Jennifer, are musicians who had a lot of engagements planned for Italy. They had a house to stay in. They were really, really looking forward to this. And at the beginning, everything was great. Then they both got sick. Luckily, they recovered. But then they saw what was happening all around them in the country. And here, Tim, I thought this was really interesting. You write, the locals all kept reassuring us, oh, it's all the media, or Italians are always so crazy. We overreact to everything. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine by next week. And then you saw how that changed as people started to accept this new reality. What was that like?
Well, the big, fundamentally, the big difference between Italy and the U.S. is they live every day alongside 2,000-year-old architecture, and I also mentioned in the article that the bakery across the street from us was a 10th generation family business. That's like a 300-year-old recipe. So I think they just have, we're like a nation of adolescents compared to that. So we have like all the adolescent paranoias and anxieties and insecurities. And so I think they just have like a deeper sense of continuity, like it's easy for us to all have these paranoid fantasies of like social collapse and systemic failure here. But like, I think they were just, they live among the ruins of history. Does that make sense?
Do you think that sense of history and longevity might be part of the reason why they didn't seem to really take this seriously for so long? Like, we've been through stuff like this before.
Right.
It's no big deal. And then finally, maybe they realized, maybe we haven't been through anything like this before.
Yeah, for sure. I feel unqualified to answer, to even be interviewed, because I've personally never been through anything like this before.
Who among us has, really? When you look at it, we're all kind of in uncharted territory here. We're kind of feeling our way along it. But having lived through what you did in Italy, the fact that you and your wife were both so ill and then recovered, and then you saw what started to happen as the country closed down, what advice do you have? And I'm really putting you on the spot here for the people of Chicago or the people in the state of Illinois, based on what you've seen and what you've lived through. What can you share with us?
To be totally frank, it took us a while to come to the decision to rush home, because we weren't sure that we might not be safer there, because it doesn't have the sort of, tensions and factions and disingenuous politics that are happening here. There's a greater sense of solidarity there. So I guess all I could say for advice here is just like, it's real. It's so real. Stay in. And, I think we just have to all focus on like, this is going to shape our culture, our cultures locally, nationally, globally. Beyond this, I think it's just, we all just need to like try to do the best we each can to imagine the ideal outcome of that, and not like some like dystopian thing, but like, this could be a wake-up call, I guess that's all I can say is remaining positive and remaining alone. Stay in your house and stay positive.
And you and your wife are not in the 60-plus demographic. What would you say to all of the people, the younger people who seem to think they're immune? I mean, I don't know if you were back in town yet, but Governor Pritzker was warning everybody to be careful. And then like the very next day, there were hundreds and thousands of young people at all the bars for St. Patrick's Day. And everybody was like, oh, I'm young. I don't have to worry about anything. And yet you and your wife were both very ill with this. And you're certainly not 60 years old.
No. It felt more like the flu than anything else, but it did not feel like the flu. It was definitely like, oh, this is something different. And, to be clear, we never got tested, so we don't know. Maybe,
Yeah.
It was just.
But chances are you had it.
Well, it happened right after we left Milan, and it was when it came out, and then the news started breaking, and they explained all the symptoms. We were like, oh, that's what we've been, because they're kind of a little more rare and specific than just the flu. It was really like 48 hours for me. Part of it was we were traveling, and just the stress of traveling, traveling every day, playing every night. That's exhausting. That doesn't give you time to recover. So I'm not minimizing it, because it was definitely like a couple days of really terrifying, severe symptoms for both of us. We did both go to the hospital, but I don't know. I mean, it sort of seemed like the more we could just lay still and only focus on feeling healthy, the easier it was.
Well, you just echoed something I'm sure you've heard by now, that Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson tested positive in Australia, and he tweeted out recently that they're recovering. They're on the upside of this thing. He said, all we have to do is like fold the laundry, and we need to take a nap.
Yeah. It was seriously like it was. There was that severe couple days for each of us. There was a week each, I would say, we were sick, but there was like a whole month of feeling achy and fatigued and just like confused, like why am I so tired all the time? And honestly, just like really dopey. Like, we're both kind of dopey in general, but like really extra dopey, just kind of like, why can't I concentrate on anything? So that part was prolonged, and that's frustrating. But that's not a zombie apocalypse. Just
No.
Everyone feeling dopey. That's
Yeah, we should all be
normal.
so lucky that's the worst of it that we experience. But the point I wanted to make was that you and your wife are both young, and even if you were touring and were already exhausted to start with, you were both pretty darn sick. And when I see these people who say, this isn't going to affect me, whether they're on the beaches of Florida or walking into a Irish bar in Chicago, I just want to shake my head and say, first of all, you're not immune. And second of all, even if you get a really mild case, what are you going to go home and infect your parents, your grandparents?
Yeah, well,
are you guys?
Well,
now, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to note that St. Patrick's Day and spring break aren't exactly the standards of like critical thinking in our culture. I mean, obviously they're gonna hurt other people, but those aren't the people. We need to be looking to the people that are, behaving the best and being the most compassionate and imaginative and all. Like, yeah.
So are you and Jennifer both feeling well now? You're on the other side of this, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, we're the same as everyone else, like restless and moderately anxious, but we're totally, in terms of health, we're 100%.
Well, I thought your article was really, really fascinating. And there was actually, I know we don't have a lot of time, but there was I think I read this, I don't know, in Washington Post or Time Magazine. There was a town in Texas where they were all texting each other, oh, this whole thing is just the media blowing it out of proportion, kind of what you heard in Italy. And then this one woman in the community, her husband came down with it. And last I heard, he's been in ICU for a week. It looks like he's going to be there for another week. He's in a medically induced coma. And she was starting to put the word out. It's like sometimes, it seems like it's not real until somebody in your family or somebody in your social circle comes down with it. And then it is all too real. And I want to thank you, because what your article did was make it real for those of us who haven't come up against it in our families, in a way that I think will really inspire people to realize how careful they have to be in the next few weeks. So thank you for that, Tim.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for receiving it in that way. And I would like to note that, like, in my experience, the most real thing was like the relentless positivity and like mental resilience of my Italian friends who are all like, in isolation now, because I think much more scary than the actual thing, which, like, obviously, like, society's most vulnerable are going to be affected badly, but like, it's tragic, but like the sort of collective global psyops of the whole thing is unprecedented. So just seeing like how strong my Italian friends were in remaining optimistic is, I think, the most important thing to take from this.
Thank you so much, Tim. Tim Kinsella. It's on Chicago Magazine's digital site, I Barely Made It Out of Italy. It is really fascinating and educational. Glad you're home. Glad Jennifer's better.
Thank you.
And thanks for talking to us, Tim.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank